In his magnum opus, Being and Time, Martin Heidegger presents what he calls an existential analysis of Dasein. Now, Dasein is a German word, it literally means being there, but is roughly his fancy term for talking about human beings. And he thinks that we come to a particular confrontation with the nature of our existence when we confront our own deaths. In particular, he thinks that in confronting death, we confront the way in which our existence is uniquely our own and inescapably our own.
Why are Heideggerians so punctual?
Why?
Because they like being on time.
That's not all that funny.
People laughed when I told it at the Heidegger conference.
Maybe I just had to be there.
Being in Time is a dense, difficult, jargon-filled work of about 400 pages. So let me summarize it for you in 2 words. You exist! What Heidegger offers in Being in Time is what he calls an existential analysis of Dasein. Dasein is Heidegger's term of art for the particular kind of being that human beings are. And in particular, he's interested in the way that human beings are constantly engaged in a project of making sense of their own existence to themselves. That we are open-ended in a way that other things aren't. A rock is just a rock, whereas what I am is something that I am articulating in everything that I do. So, for example, right now I am looking at a camera and talking about Heidegger. And why am I doing that? Well, that's part of a project where I'm going to post a video to YouTube, which is part of this larger online philosophy business that I'm running, which is part of a larger set of projects in which I understand myself as somebody who wants to orient a significant part of their life toward the study of philosophy. So in talking at the camera right now, I am in some small way articulating an understanding of what my life is, who I am. I am somebody who is interested in philosophy. And this is true, Heidegger thinks, for everything that we do. So, if I decide to go for a walk or lie in bed, that is giving some account of the kind of understanding I have of what matters to me and why. And so at every moment of my life, I am in some way articulating my understanding of who and what I am. What's more, that articulation takes place in a world in which I am engaged with and involved with other things and other people. So for example, this whole business of being an online philosopher, I wouldn't be able to do it if I didn't have a camera pointed at me right now. That camera wouldn't exist if it weren't for various metals and other minerals drawn from the earth that were assembled in microchip factories in Taiwan or however they happen to do this. And it wouldn't be possible also if there weren't other people who were able to watch the videos and to discuss philosophy with me. Thank you in advance for liking this video and following my YouTube channel. So there's a whole set of ways in which my whole way of what Heidegger calls being in the world is part of this larger process of making sense of who I am in a way that then intrinsically involves me with the other things and the other people in the world. And the first half of Being in Time, Division 1 of Being in Time, is a detailed analysis of the way in which Dasein is related to its world, related to other people, and how it makes sense of itself in this context. Division 2 of Being in Time, the second half of Being in Time, begins with a chapter on death. And death comes into the picture in an interesting way. Heidegger in Division 1 has given, as far as he's concerned, a thorough and rigorous account of the way in which Dasein is in the world in relation to all the things in the world. Death isn't some further thing in the world that he's left out. It's not some further event that he needs to take care of. It's rather, you might say, the limit that defines Dasein's being in the world. You might say that if his existential analysis in Division 1 is all the notes that he's playing in a piece of music, death is the silence out of which that music emerges. And so in that sense, his analysis of death is not to portray it as that thing that happens later on, that thing that happens at the end of life, but rather you might say a shadow that is cast over life as a whole. He talks about Dasein as what he calls being towards death, that in every moment of our lives are shaped by, structured around the fact of our mortality. And that's not something then that we can defer thinking about until later, precisely because it is something that is integrated into every moment of our existence. Heidegger describes death as Dasein's ownmost, non-relational, and not to be outstripped possibility. And I thought I should say maybe something about each one of those three terms. So let's start with the ownmost idea. So in what sense is my death my own? Well, this sweater that I'm wearing is my own. I've got a pair of shoes that are my own. I own a lot of things. But the thought is that someone else could wear my sweater. Someone else could wear my shoes. Someone else could do my laundry for me. Someone else could cook my meal for me. No one else can die my death for me. That there's a sense in which that is my own in a way that can't be alienated from me. It can't be taken from me. It can't be done by anyone else. Now, Delmore Schwartz once quipped that existentialism means that no one can take your bath for you. And that's true, right? Someone else could do my laundry for me, but nobody else can take my bath for me. If they take the bath, I don't get any cleaner. But the fact that nobody can take my bath for me is different in a number of important ways from the fact that no one can die my death for me. First of all, having a bath is not necessary. I could conceivably go my whole life without having any baths, even though it might not do wonders for my social acceptability. The other point, though, is that I have multiple baths, presumably. That, I can have one bath today, I can have another bath tomorrow, I can have another bath the day after. I only get one death. So death is my ownmost in a way that's unique, in a way that baths aren't. And what's more, and this is, I think, the most important sense, all of me is involved in my death. That what is at stake is my very existence, whereas baths usually are a little more low stakes. Death is also non-relational in the sense that it can't be set alongside other deaths. I've got my shoes. If I go to a friend's house, I might put my shoes near the door next to their shoes. You've got two sets of shoes sitting next to each other. But my death doesn't sit next to anybody else's. I can't compare my death to anybody else's. That my death is mine alone, your death is yours alone. That they aren't comparable in the same way. And it's not to be outstripped in the sense that there is no escaping death, but also that means that my life has a limit to it. And that means that there are only so many things I can manage to do in my life. And this is one way in which it's significant that I am constantly articulating my understanding of the meaning of my life. That if I choose to give a lot of time to philosophy, that's time I'm not giving to mastering the art of carpentry. It's time I'm not giving to learning how to scuba dive. It's time I'm not giving to learning chemistry. And that means that every choice I make is a choice not to do something else. And it's because my death is not to be outstripped that the choices I make take a salience that they wouldn't have if time were infinite. Now, Heidegger thinks that we have a strong temptation and a strong tendency not to think too much about death. And we have various strategies to avoid thinking about death. We might describe someone who thinks a lot about death as gloomy and morbid. That's not something you should spend all your time thinking about. Or we might say, why do I need to think about death? Of course I'm going to die. Everybody dies. I know that. So what? No big deal. Nothing to see there. Or I might put it off. I might think, really I should probably think a bit more about mortality, but I'll wait till I'm older. I've still got a lot of years ahead of me. Or I might come up with various kinds of consolations. I might say, well, when someone dies, that just means there's one more angel in heaven that knows your name. These are all what Heidegger calls inauthentic ways of being towards death. They're ways of being in relation to death that don't reckon with the full existential implications of death. So what is an authentic way of being towards death? Heidegger's term to describe it is anticipation. The German word is Vorlaufen. It literally means something like running ahead. There's an image, you might say, of me in my mind running ahead toward the end of my life, of sort of seeing my life as a delimited whole. So for the most part, I just go about my life in a day-to-day, week-to-week way, and I'm very easily caught up in whatever the business of the day is, whatever is most immediately present to me. In anticipation, though, I'm taking in my life as a whole, and I'm asking myself not what is most relevant to me right now, but what do I want my life as a whole to mean? And in doing that, I'm also recognizing that my life is uniquely my own. I said earlier that no one can die my death for me. One of the things that helps me recognize is that nobody can live my life for me. And yet, Heidegger thinks, most of us, most of the time, do try to get other people to live our lives for us. That in terms of trying to figure out what my life will mean, I often just turn myself over to whatever everybody else is doing around me. I'm going to get the career, I'm going to get the spouse, I'm going to get the mortgage, I'm going to get the 2.5 kids and the dog, because that's what one does. And Heidegger thinks that thinking about what one does is a way of, you might say, fobbing off my responsibility for my own existence onto other people. But when confronted with the uniqueness of my own death, I am also confronted with the uniqueness of my own life, that I can't get other people to live my life for me. And so I become fully responsible for it. And recognizing that responsibility, that my life is uniquely my own to live, is a source of great anxiety, Heidegger says. It suddenly confronts me with this question of how on earth could I possibly make some sense of this life that I'm leading? But he also thinks that it's liberating, that it helps you recognize how free you are to determine what your life will mean. And so he thinks that reckoning with death, you might say, is a way of reckoning with life. That to the extent that being towards death is the shadow that sort of is cast over life as a whole, coming to an authentic apprehension of death allows us to come to an authentic apprehension of life as well.
Setting aside all this Heidegger stuff, I would really appreciate it if you were to give this YouTube video a like, maybe follow this YouTube channel. I appreciate all the support.
Try being toward YouTube.